You're listening to Bible Truth Feed, a podcast by christadelphianvideo.org for Christadelphians and all those seeking the truth about the Bible message. Join us now as we present our latest episode.
Now, Habakkuk's not that very well-known book, except for two particular quotes, but we'll come to that in a little while. But Habakkuk is really, when you look at it, a truly amazing book, as we shall see in our studies. Well, we've got 3 nights. This one's been brought ahead a little, so I'm sorry about that. But we'll get to the next one in about 2 weeks' time, and then the next one in about a week's time, God willing. Well, let's look at Habakkuk itself. Habakkuk is an interesting book. It was discovered amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, not so much as the book was discovered. There was a commentary on Habakkuk that was discovered. Now, here's part of the caves in the Qumran group, all right? And this one here particularly, in that group, they found all sorts of scrolls of Isaiah, manual discipline and so forth. But they found a commentary on Habakkuk. And the interesting thing about it is it quotes the Bible. It quotes Habakkuk. So clearly Habakkuk pre-existed or existed or was written before that commentary was made. And so we're certain that it's a very old book. Of course it is. We know that from Scripture. We know it's all inspired. But there is no doubt about it, as proven by what was discovered at the Dead Sea. Well, here's the book, here's the time periods of the kings that we know so well. And if you do know that period, we're coming down here to Josiah, and particularly in that period there is Habakkuk. So if you know that chart and you're familiar with it, then you'll know where that is. And that's where we're going. Here's it being expanded a little bit more. We'll come back to this later on. So don't worry about the detail there, but it's going to come into the period shortly after Josiah, into that period, possibly in Jehoahaz, or certainly in Jehoiakim's period, that Habakkuk was written. We'll see why in a minute. But let's come back to look at Habakkuk himself. And some of these details worth jotting down in your margin as we go through, because we're going to go into the background. We're going to have a look at the man himself. He's a truly amazing man. Truly amazing man. Well, first of all, he's never named elsewhere in Scripture. So we really don't get any clues except in this book, in the book of Habakkuk. Well, actually his name, the root from his name, was used in our readings today. I don't know if you have done the readings from 2nd Kings. Do you remember that Shunammite woman where Elisha came to, and she built a room up on her roof for Elisha to stay. And he wondered what he could do for her. And he said, that somebody said to him, give her a baby. Give her a baby. And it says there that she will have that baby and embrace him. That's the meaning of the word Habakkuk. It's the root of Habakkuk. It's not used anywhere else except as that verb there, the verb of Habakkuk. It's actually the word Habak in 2nd Kings chapter 4 verse 16, that she will embrace a little baby. Oh, she would have been utterly delighted by that as we read that, did that in our readings this morning. So his name means the embracer or wrestler. And you'll see, or you will remember from the reading we just did, that he had a problem. He saw Israel as being, relatively apostate. And he said, God, you should do something about it. When God said he would, he said he'd send the Babylonians against him. And he was horrified. But finally, we're going to learn in chapter 2 of how he changes. So he's somebody who wrestles with the Word of God and then passionately embraces it within this chapter or within this book. So it indeed describes him in that book and what he does. Habakkuk, the wrestler who passionately embraced God's word. Let's pray that we do that. Pray that we listen to God's word and allow it to impact upon us. Yes, we might wrestle with it at times as we hear things in it. Oh, it seems difficult. Look at all the judgments going to come. But then truly embrace it, brethren and sisters, for it is a wonderful word. Well, what more do we know about Habakkuk? Well, first of all, if you come back with me to chapter 1, which we read a few moments ago, verse 1, the burden which Habakkuk, the prophet, did see. Now, it's often said in the Bible, the prophet, but it's not definite article, but it's certainly here. The Hebrew letter, heth, comes before the word prophet, and that means the prophet. Again, look at chapter 3, verse 1. It's worth jotting down in your margin that it is the definite article, heth. And it says there, a prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet, upon Shigionoth. So here we can see he's not just an ordinary man. He's the prophet. Now, there were other the prophets, but he's a very prominent prophet, obviously, in the scriptures. So it's the definite article there. But as well as that, he's a prophet. Now, the Hebrew word for prophet, if you're jotting it down again, comes from the root, is the word nabai. And it means an inspired man. Of course it does. Of course it does. What else could we expect? It's from the verb to prophesy, to foretell. And of course there were many prophets in the scriptures, but I've gone and listed a couple of them that might surprise you as being described as prophets. Well, at least the first two may surprise you as being prophets. And here they are in detail. So we haven't gone away from those quotes. In Deuteronomy, at the end of Moses' life, it says, "And there rose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom Yahweh knew face to face, in all the signs and wonders which Yahweh sent him to do in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and in all the mighty hand, in all the great terror which Moses showed in the sight of all Israel." Yes, he was a great prophet, an inspired one, who led that nation through the wilderness, out of Egypt, through the wilderness and so forth. So that's one type of inspired one, a great leader who was moved by the word of God. We pray that's us in that sense, that we're moved by the word of God. But in Psalm 39 verse 1, it's a psalm of David. And then in verse 3 it says, "My heart was hot within me while I was musing, the fire burned. Then I spake, I with my tongue." So here's how it happens. Here it happened to David, probably to Moses at times. They became enthused by something, enthused by God's influence on their mind and in their heart, and they spake it. In this case, he wrote a psalm, and we're going to see that's appropriate also to Habakkuk in a minute. We're going to see that's appropriate to Habakkuk. But as well as that, in Jeremiah chapter 37, verses 6 to 8, then came the word of Yahweh unto the prophet Jeremiah, saying, "Thus saith Yahweh, behold, Pharaoh's army shall return to Egypt, and the Chaldeans shall come again and fight against this city and take it and burn it with fire." So he predicted the future. So here's some of the things that prophets can do. Be great leaders. Moses, led, guided by the Spirit of God. Ones that sung, and those that prophesied. So here we can see some of those prophets, and this man is in many regards all of those. Well, Habakkuk was a watchman. It's also clearly stated that he was. You look at chapter 2 verse 1. "I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me." So here it is, watch, watch, watchtower. 3 times that word watch comes up. It's really being emphasised. Rotherham says that word there, tower, is the word watchtower. So here he is. He's bothered by the fact that God is going to use the Babylonians to crush his people, Jewry. Oh, he knew they were wicked, but he thought that was just going too far. And so he stands upon his watchtower to hear what God will say, to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Read my people, says the English ESV version, that rendering of it. So here he is. He is also a watchman. But notice, we get a real time period of this book. And it's really based upon only 1 or 2 verses, but very validly upon those verses. Look with me again to chapter 1, verse 6. For lo, I will raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They'll come through Israel. They'll invade. The Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, another name for them, isn't it? They will attack. So in other words, it's written at a time before the Babylonians attacked. Just before that time, this book is written. Okay? And so that is one of the important clues, a very important clue on this book as to why we'll date it at this particular point. So it's worth jotting down in the margin there, the importance of that verse. But now, as well as that, he was a poet. He wrote the prayer in chapter 3, verse 1, the prayer of Habakkuk the prophet upon Shigionoth. Okay? Now that word Shigionoth, not exactly the word, but I think it's only a translational difference probably, is in Psalm 7 in reference to David. So Shigionoth. Okay, it's worth jotting again in the margin. The only other use is in Psalm 7, in the introduction to that psalm. Shigionoth means a soul-stirring song. And it must be really quite amazing. Think about this. Smith's Bible Dictionary says this of this book and no other like this. Ooh, what does he say? He says, whoever wrote it was a poetic genius of the highest order. Wow. Wow. Of the highest order. Wow, this is Habakkuk. He says then later, goes on to say, chapter 1 and 2 is rhythmic. So it's pulsing in the wording. But then chapter 3, it's of the noblest poetry anywhere found in the Word of God. And we'll deal with a little bit of that in our 3rd study. We'll deal with that chapter in the 3rd study, but that poetry a little then. Well, what an amazing man he was. Think of all the things we've seen so far. He wrote that book of Habakkuk. He was passionately embraced by it. He was a prophet, inspired man, the prophet, an amazing man, a watchman. And now we're seen as a poet. What an incredible man. And it appears to be of the Levitical family. A Levitical man of the temple choir. Now, you're in Habakkuk. Come with me for a moment to 2 Chronicles chapter 29. 2 Chronicles chapter 29. And we read there in chapter 29 and verse 25 of the musicians. So, in other words, this is a quote worth again, as we'll see in a moment, jotting down and against the verse we'll look at in a second. But 2 Chronicles, chapter 29, verse 25, and there we read, and he set the Levites in the house of Yahweh with cymbals, with psalteries, with harps, according to the commandment of David, and of Gad the king's seer, and of Nathan the prophet. So was the commandment of Yahweh by his prophets. So there was musicians. And it would appear that they were Levites, and it may well have even been a priest. But anyhow, come back then to Habakkuk. Look at chapter, again, well, remember chapter 3, verse 1, upon Shigionoth. That's a poetic term. Then look at verse 3. God came from Teman and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. And again, that's another poetic term. And then lastly, this is the strong point, chapter 3, verse 19. Yahweh, God in my strength, he hath made my feet like hinds' feet, and hath made me to walk upon mine high places. To the chief singer on my stringed instrument. And that Hebrew word there, stringed instrument, is the word niganoth. And as I said a moment before, that means either a stringed instrument or a double harp. And so that seems to be what he was playing on as he spoke, particularly Habakkuk chapter 3. So he was a truly amazing man, wasn't he? But now, this book, as I said, not terribly well known except for 2 verses. And we're going to look at other verses a little later on, but 2 particular verses. But look, first of all, here's the parts that are quoted in the New Testament. Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5. Look among the nations. We'll talk about this next class. Observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days you will not believe if you were told. And that's picked up in Acts chapter 3, verse 14. Then there's Habakkuk chapter 2. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It is hastened toward the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it will certainly come. It will not delay. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 37. And lastly, the one we know so well, really almost becomes the most pivotal verse in the whole of the New Testament. Behold, as for the proud, his soul is not right within me, but the righteous will live by faith. And picked up in 3 quotes. Utterly critical verse. We'll come back to that in a few moments. So there we are. There's the quotes that are picked up into the New Testament. Okay? And it's particularly this that we remember, and that is noted so importantly in the New Testament. Well, this book also, as I said to you before, is an answer to Judaism. You see, Judaism was spreading throughout many of the early ecclesias. I think we've got time. Come with me to Galatians. To Galatians chapter 2. And here's Judaism beginning to rampage. Well, beginning. I think it was quelled for a time and then probably grew again. But in Galatians, when I get there, we'll have a look at it. In Galatians chapter 2, verse 1, it seems to imply that the problem began in Jerusalem. Verse 1. Galatians chapter 2, verse 1. Then 14 years after I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and took Titus with me also. Then verse 4. And that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in privily to spy out our liberty. Now you see, Judaism was a problem in the mind of Habakkuk somewhat, because he thought the Jewish people were far more important than anybody else. Even though they were wicked, he thought that they were far more important. That's a Judaistic spirit. It was also spreading, as I said, to Antioch. Look at chapter 2, verse 11. But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. For before that certain came from James, he did eat with Gentiles. But when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. See that? Jews are the only ones that are right. He began to think that for a moment. Then in Galatia, chapter 3, verse 1. O foolish Galatians, who have bewitched you? And then verse 5. He therefore that ministereth to you the Spirit and worketh miracles amongst you, doeth he by the works of law or by the hearing of faith? Obviously of faith. So you can see, there was the problem. And how's it addressed? Look at verse 11. But no man is justified by the law, which the Jews followed, to the sight of God, it is evident. For the just shall live by faith. There we are. One of the most important key verses in the whole of the New Testament. The just shall live by faith. You know, it's utterly critical. We'll stay there, but I'll read you one verse from Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2. And Yahweh answered and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth. So it's got to be so clear that even if somebody's running flat out, they can read it and understand it. It's utterly critical, that verse. So Habakkuk is cited in in Galatians chapter 3 verse 11 to the Galatians. It's cited to the Romans in Romans chapter 1 verse 17. And it's cited to the Jewish brethren of Jerusalem in Hebrews chapter 10 verse 38. So it is highly critical. It is utterly critical that we understand this verse. It's by faith predominantly that we can be saved. So clearly Habakkuk faced a similar Judaistic problem. Habakkuk felt that in spite of Judah's weakness and wickedness, they were Jews. They were Jews. And so much more worthy than any other nation, and did not deserve the fearful judgments that were going to come on them. So it's critical, isn't it, that we walk by faith. So, what was happening at that time, brethren and sisters? What was happening that was causing Habakkuk to look at these things this way? You see, Josiah was only just before that period. We saw that in those two charts that I showed. We'll come back to it in a minute. Josiah had done a wonderful reformation. Habakkuk lived in times just after Josiah, which unfortunately were acutely wicked. Come back with me to Habakkuk chapter 1 and verse 2. What do we read? Oh, Yahweh, how long shall I cry? Thou wilt not hear, even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. And he goes on and on, of the iniquity of the people. So what caused this to happen? Well, you see, Josiah had reformed the nation. If we can come back with me to, say, 2 Kings, first of all, chapter 23. And maybe it's worth jotting down in the margin against this quote in Habakkuk. But in 2 Kings, look what he did to the abominations. He got rid of them. The little picture on the left gives you a bit of an idea. Yeah. But anyhow, I'm getting there slowly. 2 Kings chapter 23. I talk too much and not turn up thinking carefully. But anyhow, we'll get there. 2 Kings chapter 23 and verse 5. Look what he did. Verse 5. You think of it, just this one man stood up and did this. And he put down the idolatrous priests, whom the kings of Judah had ordained, to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Judah, and in the places round about them. Them also that burn incense unto Baal, to the sun and to the moon and to the planets and to all the hosts of heaven. So he got rid of that. And if you come with me on a little bit to 2 Chronicles, the parallel record, it says further to that he endeavoured to get them to worship in truth. 2 Chronicles chapter 34 and verse 33. And we read there, and Josiah took away all the abominations out of all the countries that pertained to the children of Israel, and made all the children of Israel, and made all that were present in Israel to serve, even to serve Yahweh their God. And all his days they departed not from following Yahweh, the God of their fathers. Strong influence. All his days. And if you look at chapter 35, the next one, verse 1. Moreover, Josiah kept the Passover unto Yahweh in Jerusalem, and killed the Passover on the 14th day of the month. It was dramatic what he did. It was dramatic. Verse 18 underlines how excellent was that Passover. Look at verse 18. And there was no Passover like to that kept in Israel from the days of Samuel the prophet, neither did all the kings of Israel keep such a Passover as Josiah kept, and so on. So think about it, brethren and sisters. Look at the Reformation that was executed at that time. A brilliant Reformation that was achieved at that time. Amazing. But you see, in a moment, it had changed. In a moment, apostate times came on the nation. They went back to their old ways as soon as he was off the scene. So as soon as Josiah was gone, his son Jehoahaz, we won't turn to it, 2 Kings 23 verse 32, did that which was evil in the sight of Yahweh his God. What about the next king, Jehoiakim? Did evil in the sight of Yahweh his God. They all did. Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, Zedekiah, they were all the same. And in a moment, they changed back. Brethren and sisters, we've had the pioneers. Let's pray and hope that we're not going quickly in the way of evil as soon as they pass off the scene. Let's hope we follow that same spirit, loving God's word and walking in it, not following the example of Israel at that time. So here we've got it, brethren and sisters, a very potent warning to us. Well, what's the time period of this prophecy? Well, we've been suggesting it in Josiah's day, and I'll just read this. No contemporary king is named, so no date is precisely given, but it was written when God would raise up the Chaldeans. We read of that in chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. Maybe we can have a look at it again. Behold, ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvellously. For I will work a work in your days which ye will not believe, though it be told you. For lo, I will raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. So he will judge Judah. So a time when the Chaldeans had already had success in battle, but not to Israel. Chapter 1, verse 15. They take up all of them with the angle. They catch them in their net and gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. That's what Habakkuk said. He was looking on what was happening in the world at that time. So corrupt Nineveh was conquered by the Babylonian Medio alliance. So we're going back a little bit. And initiated by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon at that time, who sent his son, first of all, Nebuchadnezzar, as army general, who later ruled this powerful Babylonian empire, obviously. So first off, he comes as a general in these days. Now, Pharaoh Necho was alarmed by this. He got to hear about it way down south, advanced his powerful army through Israel to the Euphrates, to war at Carchemish. On the way at Megiddo, he was opposed by Josiah, who was wounded and died. So let's have a look at it. This is what happened. Here's Carchemish. Here's Megiddo. What happened was, first of all, out of there came Pharaoh Necho. He came up north of Jerusalem to Megiddo. There it is. And at Megiddo, he was confronted by Josiah. And Josiah died in the battle. We remember that probably quite well. Then he went north to Carchemish, battled there, but he did not win, of course. And so then he retreated back to Jerusalem. And at Jerusalem, he changed the king. He changed the king. More on that in a second. And then he went home. So he took over Judah for the time being. So there we can see what happened. So Josiah was wounded and died at Megiddo. Well, the time periods of the prophecy. Jehoahaz was made king 3 months. That was the king that was Pharaoh Necho took captive. And he took captive to Egypt. Okay? And his brother Jehoiakim replaced him and ruled 11 years. We'll look at that in a minute again. And later, Jehoiachin reigned 3 months, and then later Zedekiah. You know, they're really very similar names, aren't they? It's a bit hard to remember which ones. I remember the words, have king, will conquer. Jehoahaz, have king, will conquer. And let me say it. Have king, K for king, will conquer. See the C there. I don't know if that's an easy way to remember it, but there's one letter in each of them that's kind of unique, and it helps to remember in my mind those 3 kings, all right? So here they are, the sons of Josiah, and the first one, he reigned for only 3 months, and then along came Jehoiachim, and he reigned for 11 years, and then came Jehoiachin, he reigned for 3 months again, and then came Zedekiah, who reigned for 11 years. So it's easy to remember, 11, 3, 11, 3, isn't it? Okay, 3 months and 11 years, but there they are. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Slow me down, wave if I'm racing you and you want to get something down. So here they are. Here's the time periods up here. So here's Josiah's good reign, and here's Jehoahaz's 3 months reign, and then comes Jehoiakim's 11-year reign, and then comes Jehoiachin's 3 months reign. Now, not quite the right spacing, but I wanted a colour that you can see. And then comes Zedekiah, who reigned 11 years again. All right, I hope that's clear. And if you want me later on to put that back up there, we can put it back up there, but that's critically important. And what about this? There we are. There's the period of Habakkuk's prophecy. We don't know if it was in Jehoahaz's or Jehoiakim, but certainly in the early stages. Because Josiah, good Josiah, has gone off the scene. And things have apostatized in a moment. In just a moment, it's gone back. It's terrible to consider. It's changed. So, what are we seeing? Well, in Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 1 to 4, look at verse 2. O Yahweh, how long shall I cry? Thou wilt not hear. Even cry unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. He says, I can see the Babylonians coming. Something's got to be done to them. I'm seeing my nation Israel and the iniquity of Israel. Something's got to be done to them to punish them. Now, so Habakkuk begins by complaining and questions why God doesn't do anything for wicked Judah in verses 1 to 4. But God's answer is that he plans to punish them using the Chaldeans, verse 6. Now we'll go back over this again next class as we come closer to the verses. But verse 6, for lo, I will raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess it, and the dwelling places that are not theirs. Habakkuk had asked for something to be done with Judah, and then when he heard that, he's shocked. Oh, why them? It's far worse than I think they deserve. So now here's the breakdown of the book. Here's the breakdown, the burden. We read most of that just a few moments ago, the chairman did. Habakkuk's frustration at what's going on. Okay? Here, that's why he feels burdened with this. Why does God allow Judah's iniquity without punishment? Do something to them, maybe punish them, to turn them back to Josiah's way, please. God says, yes, I will. Evil will not go unpunished. We read that only a few moments behind. Behold, ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvellously, for I will do a work in your days, which you will not believe, though it be told you. Or it's going to come fiercely upon them. The evil will not go unpunished. And he describes that in detail, going through it all, through to verse 11. Verse 11, then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend imputing that his power unto his God. That will be the Babylonian. When they come against Judah, they will iniquitously do it and punish Judah. More on that, as I said, next class. So then our second question arises then. But should the persecutor of Israel prosper? Shouldn't Babylon be crushed? You shouldn't allow that to happen. God's people are much more important and much more better than Babylon. This perplexed Habakkuk. And so he waits his answer. Look at chapter 2, verse 1. I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. So he wants an answer. Fancy bringing the Babylonians against Israel. I know that they were iniquitous, but please not them. And we'll see next time the Romans and the Russians. But more on that next time. Here we see Yahweh's answer, as I said a moment ago, to the prophet's concern. But the facts are then given. The answer, they need to show faith. Look at chapter 2 again, verse 2. And Yahweh answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth, or we may run that readeth. We don't miss that point. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarry, await for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. And so he says, you've got to be different. Behold, his soul, which is lifted up, is not upright in him. But the brethren and sisters who are faithful, the just, shall live by his faith. Is that us? Let's hope it is, brethren and sisters, that we have utter faith in the truth. So here was the answer. That was the first fact God gave. And the second one, God's justice will result in judgment on the oppressors, on Babylon, as we'll see, on Rome, and on Russia and his allies later on. Now, I've got this in slightly, that same section in slightly better wording, or easier wording to follow. Just going back over it again. We'll come to it in detail next time. Verses 1 to 4, Yahweh's seeming indifference to Israel's evil. Habakkuk said, look how wicked they are. And then in verses 5 to 11, Yahweh reveals his intention. Yes, I know they are wicked. I will punish Judah by using the Chaldeans. And then in verses 12 to 17, Habakkuk's horrified. He cannot accept that Yahweh would use a heathen nation like the Babylonians, the Romans, the Russians, against his special people. And then in chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, Yahweh rebukes Habakkuk's nationalism. He says, look, you can't be for Judah all the time. This cannot be Judaistic, really, but you must let faith alone to work. Faith alone is the basis of justification. Absolutely critical for us. And then we'll see a little later, and we're going to see it slightly expanded, verses 5 to 20 in a second. Yahweh is in control. Israel will ultimately be saved and the Chaldeans destroyed. How do we know that? He then gives a series of woes. He summarises Babylon's sins in verses 5 and 6. Look at it. Yea, also, chapter 2, verse 5. Yea, also, because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man. Neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. There it is. That's what Russia's also doing, isn't it? Shall not all these take up a parable against him, a taunting parable against him, and say, woe? And you know, it's worth colouring in. There's the first woe. The second one is in verse 9 at the start of it. Then the next one, the third one, is verse 12 in the start of it. The next one is in verse 15 at the start of it. And the next one, the fifth one, is in verse 19 at the start of it. So there we can see the 5 woes. The 5 woes that are going to come on Babylon. Woe to those dominated by insatiable ambition. There we are. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to conquer everything. He wanted to expand, conquer the lot. And then in verses 9 to 11, woe to those who gain security by extortion, by false mechanisms. They get hold of security in those countries. And then, woe to those who follow power politics in their life. Not that we don't understand it, but exploit that mechanism is what the Babylonians would do. Woe to them that then go forth and corrupt others. Babylon did that then, and in the book of Revelation it does so again, doesn't it? Woe to those who follow after idolatry. So you can see there is the structure of those first 2 chapters. But brethren and sisters, look at verse 20. But Yahweh is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. God will act. And he will act very, very soon upon this world scene in which we're living. He sees all those situations that Babylon is following, and he is determined to bring those woes upon Babylon of today, the Russians, and it will happen. Yahweh is in the heavens, and he will accomplish his purpose, and he will not keep silent. It's soon to come. So we need to be prepared, brethren and sisters, for that day that is going to come upon us in the very near future. And so, brethren and sisters, chapter 2, verse 3, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, brethren and sisters, it seems like time's going by and nothing's happening. Wait for it, because it will surely come, and he will not tarry. He will not tarry. It will happen. And what will be the consequence? What will be the final outworking of all this, brethren and sisters? Look at chapter 2, verse 14. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. It will certainly come to pass, and it will be accomplished, brethren and sisters. And so verse 20 of chapter 2. But Yahweh is in his holy temple in the heavens. Let all the earth keep silent before him. It will happen, and it will happen in a very, very near future. And we see that in what has taken place. Well, I'm looking at the time, brethren and sisters. Our time really has somewhat run out. We've probably got another 5 minutes. We could have done something more. Should I go ahead? I've got a little bit more. No, all right. Let's leave it there, brethren and sisters. But let us keep our minds very muchly on the truth. Let us walk in that holy way, following the example of Christ, and wait for it. It's coming. Don't get faithless. Wait for it. Be confident. Christ will return. We see the signs around us. Do you know, just think of what's going on in Ukraine. Remember what the scripture said? Out of the north will come Jews into the land. 20,000 Jews left Russia just in the last 6 months and flew into Israel. They're coming back to that land. The days are short. Let us leave it at that. Thank you. Habakkuk learns the destiny of the Jews and the invaders' final destruction. which we're going to look at in a few minutes. But Habakkuk contains within it some vital messages, which I'd like to stand back from the book for a minute and look at for a second. You see, first of all, it contains a Bible's life-saving message. One of the key messages, probably the key message of the whole Bible. The just, we hope that's us, will live by faith, by his faith. More on that in a minute. But judgment will come for the Gentiles. Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 6 says, I will raise up the Chaldeans. Verse 5 of that same chapter is quoted in Acts 13 verse 41, and we'll look at that later, concerning the Romans in AD 70. And Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 6 appears to be alluding to the battle when the Russians come down and execute Armageddon. So here we are at critical, dangerous times, and we've got this life-saving message which will have a worldwide consequence. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 14. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That's going to be the conclusion. But even more wonderful for us, brethren and sisters, is this. In chapter 2 verse 20, as we read only a few moments ago, but Yahweh is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. The temple will be built. And God willing, we will be part of that setup that shall be established in that day and have a glorious result. And so there's the overreaching message, particularly of chapters 1 and 2. All right? But let's come back to chapter 1 and think about, first of all, very briefly, a little of the background that we looked at last time. Last class, we learned of the collapse of Judah because of their apostasy. They'd gone away from what Josiah had done. And here, his sons, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim probably at that time was ruling. And they'd gone back. Utterly shocking. Look at chapter 1, verse 2. O Yahweh, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? I even cry unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Here's Habakkuk appealing to God, do something, save this people, reform them before it is too late. And what Habakkuk is thinking is it's going to be like in the days of the judges, when they went astray and then God would raise up a judge, faithful judge, which would reform them. Or possibly in the days of Samuel, maybe we could look at it. Come with me to 1 Samuel chapter 7. And of course, they had been wicked. And finally, chapter 7, verse 3. And Samuel spake unto all the house of Israel, saying, if ye do return unto Yahweh with all your hearts, and put away the strange gods. This is what Habakkuk wanted. And Ashtaroth from among you, and prepare your hearts unto Yahweh, and serve him only. He will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. Reform. That's what Habakkuk wanted. And what he expected to see was like verse 10. And as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But Yahweh thundered with a great thunder on the day upon the Philistines and discomfited them, and they were smitten before Israel. We'll leave it there. But you see, judgment came on that nation, and because the nation reformed. That's what Habakkuk thought would happen. Somebody would come and would cause the nation to reform like Samuel, and they would turn back and they would be saved. That's what he was expecting. But that wasn't going to be what's going to happen. Let's look at it. Well, first of all, chapter 1, verse 1, the prophet's problem. The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. He was anticipating certain things. He's anticipating heavy judgment which would turn Judah around. He expected some sort of doom to come on the land, as in the days just before that event of 1 Samuel 7, or in the days of the judges. That's what he was expecting. But brethren and sisters, look at verse 2. Here Habakkuk calls on God to reform the nation and reform those rebels within that nation. And so, as we read a few moments ago, how long shall I cry unto thee, and thou wilt not hear? He was very concerned over their moral and spiritual degradation. Josiah reformed them, but they'd gone back straight away to their old ways. And he sought Yahweh's response to reform them. We might feel that way about the world today, about Israel today, possibly. But this is what he felt. And what did he speak of? Violence. My goodness, that's very much like our day, isn't it, brethren and sisters? You remember in the days of Noah, back in Genesis chapter 6, it spoke of the great violence that was being executed at that time. I'll turn it up and save you the issue, but you know probably these words quite well. In Genesis chapter 6, it speaks of that day which is like our day. Genesis 6 verse 11. And we read there, and Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, before God. And the earth was filled with violence. Again, verse 13. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. So here was the day in which Habakkuk lived, like our day, brethren and sisters. And so this message has an application somewhat to us too. But he says, they will not save. Habakkuk seemed to feel that Yahweh was indifferent to Israel's moral decay. He wanted somebody to come like one of the judges to change them. God was going to act, but not in the way he expected. So in verse 3, we read of what he said then. Why dost thou show me iniquity and cause me to behold grievance? For spoil and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Just like us in today, contention. It's very much like what we're seeing today. Look what he is saying. Iniquity, grievance, spoiling, violence, strife, contention. God had a purpose in exposing them, though, to these trials, brethren and sisters, that they might reform. We're seeing this, brethren and sisters, today. And it's maybe a little in some of us, but we must reform. Look with me to Lamentations chapter 3. We experience trials, brethren and sisters. James chapter 1 speaks of that, doesn't it? The trials are there to help us to change, to shift what we are like and to change us. So it was in those days, brethren and sisters, that the nation might be changed, that might be reformed. And so these trials came on them. But in Lamentations chapter 3, verse 22, we read, it is of Yahweh's mercy that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Yes, things were going very wrong, but God is merciful. But now, look at verse 32. But though he cause grief, yet will he have compassion according to the multitude of his mercies. And of course, as we know in James chapter 1, if you're taking notes down, verses 3 to 4, it speaks of the trials that would come upon us, that we might be changed and prepared for the kingdom. It was coming on them at that time. And so they experienced grievance, or you notice the grievance that he talks about. It's the word oppression and injustice. Possibly Habakkuk's feeling that he is suffering because he is preaching and teaching what's right, just as Jeremiah did. In Jeremiah chapter 20, remember what happened to poor Jeremiah. He spoke the truth, and Pasha smote Jeremiah the prophet and put him in stocks. What a terrible thing it was. And so in verse 4 we read, therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth, says Habakkuk. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. He said, God, you've got to do something. Look at this. The law is slack. They're not obeying the law. It was a time of acute corruption, as we know. You look with me to 2 Chronicles chapter 36. And here was the state of affairs at that time. Terrible state of affairs. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, I'll get there in a minute, 36 and verse 5, we read of what the state of things were. And we read there, verse 5, Jehoiakim, where we talked about was ruling at that time, was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem and did that which was evil in the sight of Yahweh his God. But you see, Habakkuk sought right ways and true ways. On the way back, look at Psalm 34. Beautiful psalm, really. Psalm 34 verse 15, sorry. The eyes of Yahweh are upon the righteous. Habakkuk thought this and expected something. His ears are open to their cry. The voice of Yahweh is against them that do evil, to cut off the remembrance of them from the earth. This is what Habakkuk wanted. But it didn't seem to be entirely happening. Verse 18, Yahweh is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as are of a contrite spirit. So Habakkuk expected something like this to happen to them. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but Yahweh delivereth them out of them all. That's what Habakkuk wanted. But he was shocked. He was going to be utterly shocked. See, wrong judgment proceedeth. The RSV says, so justice goes forth perverted. So like our day. But now, he's told by Yahweh what's going to happen. In verses 5 through to 11. Tried to put a bit of alliteration in the titles. So, the cruel conquerors will crush them. That's the message that came from Yahweh. God declared he would act. I put those couple of quotes up because they were in our readings yesterday and the day before in Ezekiel. God will act. We won't turn those up. So evil will not go unpunished. Habakkuk thought God was not listening, but now he's shown that God would act. Oh, but not in the way he was thinking. Verse 5. Behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvellously. For I will work a work in your days which ye will not believe, though it be told you. Something's going to shock you, Habakkuk. You will not believe it. For I will work in your days an absolute staggering event. Verse 6. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans. So God was going to raise up the Chaldeans, as our map shows, and bring them into the land. They were going to be invaded. But you know, verse 5 is quoted in Acts chapter 13, verse 41. Maybe we could turn that up. Acts chapter 13, verse 41. And the context of that relates to AD 70. So Acts chapter 13, verse 41. And here's that verse we just read. Behold ye despisers, and wonder and perish. For I will work a work in your days, says Paul, quoting this, a work which you shall in no wise believe, though a man declare it. When the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, the Gentiles besought that these words might be preached to them the next Sabbath, and so on. And it was the events of AD 70 when the Romans came into that land. Coming back to Habakkuk chapter 3, and have a look at verse 16. It takes us forward to another invasion. Chapter 3, verse 16. When I heard, my belly trembled, my lips quivered at the voice. He's talking about the future and the kingdom, just in the lead up to the kingdom. We'll talk about that next class. Rottenness entered into my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he cometh up unto the people, he will invade them with his troops. This is the Russian invasion, the great Armageddon. So Habakkuk is told, you're going to see something you will not believe, though it was told you. You know, I'm telling you now. Isaiah says this, I will proceed to do a marvellous work among my people, for the wisdom of their wise shall perish. Great judgments are going to come on them. We know that. And here in Acts chapter 13, verse 40. Beware lest, the verse before what we read a moment ago, beware therefore lest that come upon you which is spoken of the prophets, and he was then talking about AD 70. And so here, 3 invasions are referred to or alluded to in this chapter to the Jewish people. Cruel conquerors would come and would crush them so that they would totally reform. So coming back to verse 6, I will raise up the Chaldeans. Habakkuk was told then that the Chaldeans and later the Romans and then in our day the Russians will come. And what will they be like? It's worth numbering these. Bitter and a hasty nation, says verse 6. Jerusalem Bible says that fierce and fiery people. Here is the Chaldeans that's coming against them. A fierce and fiery people shall come against them at that time. It would have been shocking, brethren and sisters. And it would be a taste of what would happen in AD 70. They will possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They will seize, Jerusalem Bible says, homes of others. It will be terrible. Just take over the land and occupy it on some occasions. And then a third point, verse 7. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of them. They are terrible, rather seems awful and fearful as he is he. And actually in the Hebrew, the singular is very often used here and almost consistently used. And it refers to a dictator, first of all, of course, Nebuchadnezzar. But we can come forward to Gog and probably Titus in the days of AD 70, a dictator who would take control of that land and conquer the Jewish people. So there's the third point. And then verse 8. Their horses also are swifter than the leopards and are more fierce than the evening wolves, and their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. Horses swifter than leopards. It reminds us, doesn't it, of Daniel 11. When the Gogian comes into the land, the king of the north shall come like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen. And they will fly as the eagle. That's a sighting. Sighting from Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 49. As swift as an eagle. And relates, of course, leading up to AD 70. So you can see all those 3 invasions are being alluded to. But the points that he's referring to haven't stopped. Then in verse 9, he's got the 5th point. They shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. They shall come for violence. Jerusalem Bible says they will come for plunder of all of them. Babylon sought Jerusalem's desolation and destruction. We read that verse. The next verse states in 2nd Chronicles, we won't turn to it, verse 36, verse 19, they will burn all the palaces thereof with fire. We know that. Jerusalem was decimated, didn't it, by the Babylonians ultimately. And their faces are as the east wind. What's that referring to? Maybe look with me to Jeremiah chapter 18. It's really quite neat in this regard. Jeremiah 18 verse 17. And he says there, I will scatter them as an east wind before the enemy, and I will show them the back and not the face in the day of their calamity. Why an east wind? Well, if you're standing in Israel, the east wind comes from the east, out of the desert. These dry desert winds came in. They were cruel, dry wind that would come against them. And he says, that's like the Chaldeans, like the Romans, like the Russians. And they will make of them stubble, says Jeremiah 13, verse 24. Allusion to Armageddon, isn't it? A heap of sheaves and a valley for judgment. But then in then the 7th point, gather captivity as sand. Jerusalem, the Bible says, is like if you've got a spade and went down to a sand pit, picked up the sand, you capture captors so easily. They scoop up prisoners like sand and take them back into Babylon. Oh, what cruel judgments were going to come. Then the 8th point, verse 10. And he says there in verse 10, and they shall scoff at kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and shall take it. They shall deride every stronghold and heap dust. Jerusalem Bible says, make light of all the fortresses. Be no problem to them. Any fortress, they'll just conquer it in a moment. How? They heap up earth. They'll make earthen ramps outside of those cities, just like they did with, Jerusalem. They would have made earthen ramps about it and came over the walls and took that city. Like Masada, when they made that ramp at the edge of Masada, the Romans did. So it will be again. And then the 9th point, verse 11. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and defend, imputing this his power unto his God. So when does it come to an end? Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and impute his power to his God. Rotherham said, then hath he become arrogant in spirit, and so guilty. God will permit his victories until Babylon imputes them to their God. Until Babylon imputes them to their God. Come with me to Isaiah 47. In Isaiah 47, verse 5, it clearly is talking about Babylon, or the Chaldeans. But then, look what it goes on to say in verses 9 and 10. We'll pick it up, 47 verse 5. And he says there, sit thou silent, and get thee into the darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. You're going to come to an end. Why? Well, look what they do, verse 9. But these two things shall come to thee in a moment. In one day, the loss of children and widowhood, they shall come upon thee in their perfection. For the multitude of thy sorceries, and for the great abundance of thine enchantments. For thou hast trusted in thy wickedness. Thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in thine heart, I am and none else beside me. That's what Babylon will say. That's what Rome would say. That's what, the Russians will say ultimately. And so they will put their trust in their God and not put their trust in Yahweh. So now we come to the next section. Should corrupt Gentile powers prevail, says Habakkuk. Habakkuk's now problemed by this. He's saying to himself, what are we going to do? Should this keep going like this? This is not right. Habakkuk then lists in verses 12 to 13 Yahweh's incredible qualities. He says, look, God, this is what you're like. Will you allow this to happen? Look what he says, verse 12. Art thou not from everlasting, O Yahweh my God? Mine Holy One, we shall not die. Art thou from everlasting, O Yahweh? You, the eternal God, point 1. Point 2, mine Holy One, you're holy. We shouldn't die, we're the Jews. O Yahweh, thou hast ordained them to judgment, sure, but not to complete annihilation that seems to be implied. Thou art a mighty God. The Hebrew there is zer, like a rock. So he's saying, you just establish them for correction. Surely that's all we need. And then in verse 13, he continues to list for us those qualities of Yahweh. Verse 5, the fifth one, verse 13. Thou art of pure eyes, than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that dealest treacherously, And holdest thy tongue when the wicked devour the man that is more righteous than he. He's talking about the Jewish people. You're of pure eyes. You can't look on these Chaldeans, these Romans, these Russians. Thou canst look on iniquity. Thou can't look on their treachery. And so he lists there for us 6 qualities or characteristics of Yahweh. 6 incredible qualities. And he says, well, God, because you're like that, you've got to care for the Jewish people, surely. And then he says in verse 14, and make us men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. So what's he saying there, brethren and sisters? He's saying to them, look, the men as the fish of the sea. These are the dictators who are capturing many nations like fish in a net. Here's Nebuchadnezzar. So easy. Just puts the net out, captures them all. Like Nero. Like Gog. Aren't you going to stop it? You're not going to allow this to happen, are you? Surely not. Then verse 15. They take up all of them with the angle. They catch them in their net and gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Look, brethren and sisters, he says, look at this. They, again, the Hebrew is the he, the dictator, RSV says, who dwells in luxury. Imagine what would have been like back in Babylon. Come back one, I think it was the other picture, there it was. Magnificent buildings and such would be where Nebuchadnezzar lived. And no doubt Nero and Gog has got his, or Putin if it's him, got his palaces off there up in Russia. They live in luxury, robbing other nations. But then, note, their religion, the Chaldeans, the Romans and the Russians, will be their downfall. So verse 16, therefore they sacrifice unto their net and burn incense unto their drag, because by them, that is by those nets and such like, their portion is fat and their meat is plenteous. So they claim their nets, their gods, or what weapons they have, or is the mechanism by which they achieve it. And that's how they gain their victories. And so finally in this section, verse 17, shall they therefore empty their nets and not spare continually to slay the nations? RSV, is he then to keep on emptying his net? God, listen, are you going to continue to allow this to happen? That they mercilessly slay nations forever? Can you see how Habakkuk feels? And particularly because it's his people that's going to be the brunt of that attack. Doing all these things and crediting to their God. Surely, Yahweh, you will not allow that to happen. Surely. And so now, Habakkuk worries. He's got a problem. Surely this shouldn't happen. And so he waits and watches. There he was, standing in the watchtower, looking out and watching. Yes, he wasn't watching for the army to come particularly, but he was watching for Yahweh's answer. Habakkuk could not understand how a corrupt Gentile nation could be allowed by God to crush, yes, even apostate Jewry. So we read in chapter 2, verse 1, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, the margin says watchtower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. He's expecting to get rebuked and seems to be preparing an answer to stand for this case that he has. And the answers that he's going to get is going to be quite different to what he expected. You know, this reminds us of Jonah. Remember Jonah? Jonah fled to Tarshish. What was his aim? Because he didn't want to curse. He didn't want Israel to be cursed. He wanted them to be blessed. So he said, I don't want to see the Chaldeans or the army to come against my people. And so he fled. God reproved him, and argued with him, even to the last. And he finally saw the message. Same with Habakkuk, and same should we. Same should Habakkuk, same should we. So the answer comes. Yahweh's solution. Seek the sure salvation. What's the sure salvation? Well, we don't know how long he waited, brethren and sisters, but he sat in that tower, and finally the answer came to him in verse 2. And Yahweh answered and said, write the vision and make it plain, utterly plain, upon tables, that he that runneth may read it. Look, I want you to get this message, Habakkuk, and let everybody know. And it becomes one of the key messages of the whole New Testament. It's made so that even the herald may run with it. So the person running can understand it, and he runs to let others know. It's vital to all people. So clearly the message is not just for Habakkuk, it's vital for us and all people in all ages. And so he says, verse 2, and Yahweh answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. But at the end it shall speak and not lie, though it tarry. Wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. So he says at the end, salvation will come. It will come to the Jewish people and to the ecclesia, to the Jewish people who reform, through Christ's return. Wait for it. Septuagint says, though he should tarry, wait for him, for he will surely come and will not tarry. That's what we're hoping for, isn't it? Hoping for it at any day now. So we see the gravity of what's going on. But in those days, it came in the form, first of all, 40 years later on, in Cyrus. If you like to come with me to Isaiah chapter 40, there's no shadow of a doubt that this event that is verse chapter 44 is a type of Christ, the coming of Christ. Look at Isaiah 44, verses 25 to the next chapter. And he says, that saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and shall perform all my pleasures, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. And of course it was in the days of Nehemiah. But look what it goes on to say. Thus saith Yahweh to his anointed Messiah, to Christ, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings, and I will open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. So there's the language also of Christ's coming. But of course it was what Cyrus did as he marched up the dry river Euphrates into that city. As Russia will do, he will march up that dry river Euphrates, but Christ will come at that time. Well, our time's running away from us, so we won't look at the other quotes, but 40 years later, AD 70. 40 years later than Christ would come the battle in AD 70. And Christ will surely come in our day. The time is short. Well, what is the sure way of salvation then? Well, critically, verse 4. And this is worth underlining if you haven't got it underlined, brethren and sisters. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, and the just shall live by his faith. You know, that's very, very potent, brethren and sisters. The only way to salvation is through faith. But more on that in a second. This is picked up in 3 cases, and we'll look at these a little later. In Romans chapter 1, verse 17, Galatians 3, verse 12, and Habakkuk chapter 10, verse 38. But notice there's 2 ways to read this, and both are right. Note, his faith is not quoted in the New Testament, well, in the epistles. His faith refers to Christ's faith. What did Christ have to do? He lived a perfect life, brethren and sisters. He never failed. He was utterly perfect, and he died, the consequence of flesh. And God in his utter righteousness raised him from the dead. There was an example of one who was utterly faithful in all his ways, and he gained life, and life eternal. And the door was opened that we might be saved. And so in the New Testament, it's repeatedly quoted in those quotes we've got up there, without the word his faith. There in the epistles, Christ has already risen. He's already at God's right hand. The door has been opened through him, the means whereby we might be saved, if we are the just who live by faith. So we must be warned. The soul that lifted up is not upright in himself. We must not be proud. We must not be filled by the fleshly ways. But brethren and sisters, if we walk in humility and follow the ways of the just, then follow the way of faith, we shall live, brethren and sisters. That's the ultimate result. So, how can we be saved and enter Christ's kingdom? We're talking now more of the New Testament. That's why I got it on white. Habakkuk is cited in the New Testament, showing that salvation isn't by being a Jew, but by faith. Galatians, we won't turn it up. Received ye the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith? And verse 11. But no man is justified by the law. Listen, Jews. In the sight of God, it is evident. For the just shall live by faith. That's the issue. And that's what we must be following. And so the New Testament brings that point up repeatedly. There are those three quotes. And there's three emphases there. We haven't time to look at them. But in Galatians chapter 3, verse 11, the just shall live by faith. Hebrews chapter 10, the just shall live by faith. And Romans chapter 1, verse 16 to 17, the just shall live by faith. What's faith? It comes by hearing the word of God and putting it into action, living it. That's what we've got to do, live it. And we will be deemed, therefore, to be just. That's what we must do. And it's a key message, probably the whole New Testament. Brethren and sisters, let's apply those principles in our life. But the Chaldeans and the Romans and the Russians will be punished. Yes, Habakkuk, I'm seeing what's going on. I won't let them continue. I will act, and they will be punished. Look with me at verse 5. Yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. Excuse me for a moment. So, brethren and sisters, RSV says, the wine is treacherous. The arrogant man shall not abide. What's this wine? Well, the Bible speaks of it in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 7. Babylon hath been a golden cup that maketh all the earth drunken and mad. Same with Rome, in Roman Catholicism and in their apostasy. And so it will be when the Russian Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism join together in the last day. We know that quite well, don't we, in Jeremiah chapter 70, all in bold print. It will come to pass, brethren and sisters, and they will say their initial victory, their victory, is because their God is with them. And that will be their doom. That will be their doom. And so, brethren and sisters, we come to that concluding section, Yahweh's answer to Habakkuk's problem. And the answer is that evil will not go unpunished. This world will experience punishment, trials. They will face 5 woes. Now, brethren and sisters, verses 5 to 19 is a taunting proverb. The poetry is quite potent, apparently, in the Hebrew, emphasising and bringing it home to them, brethren and sisters. And so they receive woes. Now, this is worth putting a little ring around each one of those woes. There's one in verse 6, one in verse 9, one in verse 12, one in verse 15, and one in verse 19. So the first woe is against the proud, ambitious powers. And you know, I believe he's got in mind probably what's going on in Babylon at that time. And so I've gone and put the quotes here, but time's not going to be with us to look those up. But you see, there was Babylon. There was Nebuchadnezzar, proud, ambitious Nebuchadnezzar. Oh yes, he was told that his image, and he would be the head of gold, would be smashed. But what did he do? In the next chapter, chapter 3, he built a golden image, all gold. Proud, ambitious, I will achieve total domination. Then let's read verses 9 to 11. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thy soul. For the stone shall cry out of the wall, and the beam out of the timber shall answer it. And so he talks of their wicked, belligerent army, their military power. And he says, but we warned, a stone will strike. And Nebuchadnezzar, Rome, Russia, you'll tumble. And then in verses 12 to 14, woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establisheth a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not of Yahweh of hosts that the people shall labour in the very fire? And the people shall weary themselves for very vanity. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And I think he's making a little bit of an allusion of what took place. You know, Nebuchadnezzar was bloodthirsty. What happened to poor Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego when they were cast into that fiery furnace? They were saved. You see, he may feel that he's bloodthirsty, and he's wicked, conqueror, but God can save. God can save, and they will be saved out of it. And then verses 15 to 18. Woe unto him that giveth his neighbour drink. We know what that is. That putteth thy bottle to him, and maketh him drunk. Also thou mayest look on their nakedness. So here's the polluted, apostate teaching. Thou art filled with shame for glory. Drink thou also, and thy foreskin shall be uncovered. The cup of Yahweh's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shamefully spewing shall be on thy glory. For the violence of Lebanon shall cover thee, and the spoil of the beast which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land and of the cities and of all that dwell therein. What profiteth the graven image that the maker thereof, Nebuchadnezzar, hath graven it? The molten image and a teacher of lies, that the maker of his work trusteth therein to make dumb idols. So he will poison the nations with blood, with wine. Remember in Belteshazzar, there they were having a feast in Daniel chapter 5. At the end of that chapter, the city's fallen. They were having a feast, drinking wine. And at the end of that chapter, it's all over. And so finally, verse 5, to those who exploit false religion. Woe unto him that saith to the wood, awake, and to the dumb stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, It is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. There's an idol. There's no strength in that. Don't put your confidence in that. It's worthless. And so, of course, Nebuchadnezzar exploited false religion. But brethren and sisters, look at the conclusion. The concluding culmination, brethren and sisters, coming back to verse 14, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. It's just around the corner, brethren and sisters. It's just around the corner. And what's going to be the culmination of that? Even greater. Look at verse 20. But Yahweh is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. And that's going to be enlarged in the next chapter. In chapter 3, when we look at that. The glory of the future age will be revealed to us. And so here's the culmination of that. Yes, Habakkuk, don't worry, they will be crushed. Yes, the Babylonian, the Roman, the Russian, don't worry. But, brethren and sisters, and Habakkuk, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. All will hear this and finally repent. And the result will be, there will be saints in his holy temple with the Lord Jesus Christ. God willing, that's us. But what's the answer? Very simply. Brethren and sisters, thou shalt live in faith. The just, that's we pray us, shall live in faith. So that's what we must do. So coming back to our chapter, the simple breakdown of that chapter is the prophet's problem. He could see the iniquity of Israel. It needed a reformation. He wanted a much more gentle reformation. Habakkuk called for a reform to the rebels, maybe like in the days of the judges or Samuel, a more gentle reformation. But God says, I will send cruel conquerors who will crush them. And it will. It has in the times past, and it will do so again. But Habakkuk shocked. Should corrupt Gentile powers prevail? It doesn't seem right. I'm a Jew. So Habakkuk worries, and he waits, and he watches. And Yahweh's solution comes, which we've heard, and they've heard. The just shall live firstly by his faith. The just shall live by faith. Let's follow in the example of Christ. The door has been opened by him. Yahweh has lifted him to the heavens and lifted the possibility of removing that curse. It's open to us. There's Yahweh's answer to Habakkuk's problem and for ours. But those foolish Gentiles who continue in the way of the world, they're doomed. 5 woes shall come upon them. But the final conclusion, brethren and sisters, is wonderful. Let us follow the ways, that beautiful way that is outlined for us repeatedly in the New Testament. The just shall live by faith. Strengthen your faith, brethren and sisters, and live motivated by that, and we will be together in the kingdom age. Thank you. So how good it is to be looking at Habakkuk's song of conquest and the future glory. It can be a wonderful motivation to us, we pray. But let's remind ourselves a little bit of what we looked at last time, just for a second. Habakkuk's vital life-saving message, what was it? Well, we remember very well, don't we? The just shall live by his faith. And then after he had passed away and risen, Christ had risen, the just shall live by faith. That's us. Well, Habakkuk had to learn that Israel was going to suffer. They suffered under the Chaldeans, the Romans, and we await the Russians. And what will be the consequence? Finally, the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea, says Habakkuk. Much the same as Numbers 14:21. You know, the whole earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, ultimately. And what about for us? Well, chapter 2, verse 20, as we looked at last time. But Yahweh is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. My dear brethren and sisters, with the return of Christ, we can be part of that community that will be in that temple. There's the great climax. What a wonderful prospect before us, brethren and sisters. But now, look at this chapter that we're about to look at. This chapter, well, it covers the march of the rainbowed angel. Yes, it covers more than that. It's got a bigger level, higher level, as we'll see. But underlying it is the march of the rainbowed angel. Now, we know that the angel goes forth at Christ's return. And the millennium begins, we believe, a jubilee later, 50 years later on. Now, the sections of Habakkuk are these. Don't worry too much about it, but there are 6 sections. We'll have a look at them now. All right? And they cover from Christ's return to the ushering in of the millennium. So here we are. Habakkuk's song of conquest and glory. Well, it's a plea for the consummation. Habakkuk says, right, let's have it happen. Bring to pass that wonderful joy that we're looking forward to. And the climax, Aloha, speaking of the man of the one, Christ combined with us, we pray. The united body of Christ in the kingdom age. We'll have all these headings later, don't worry, but there they are. And that is seen in this section, verses 1 to 6, as Christ and the saints will go forth from Sinai to conquer all nations using divinely given powers, pestilence and burning coals, says verse 5. We'll look at that later. Then the next section, the immediate neighbours, Arabs, Egypt, Midian and such like. These areas come under the control of Christ. He emerges from Sinai, and where does he go first? Into some of the Arab nations to the south. Russia's been down there, Daniel 11 verse 40, but it's vacated to Jerusalem. And into that vacuum goes Christ. Egypt, Sudan and then Midian, the tents of Cushan and the land of Midian will come under the control of the saints. Verse 7. Then the next section. Worldwide conquest of the nations. Now Jesus Christ marches forth out of that Arab countries, and the dominion is extended first and foremost from the river of Egypt to the river Euphrates. The promised land comes under his control. Thine anger is against the rivers. We'll see a little bit more on that later. All right? But now, coming on from there, and we'll come back to these headings later, Christ goes forth. Verses 11 to 13, divine authority established on earth. Christ conquers outside the land. So after Armageddon and control from the river Euphrates, the river of Egypt, he extends his power throughout the earth. Sun and the moon stood still at thy spear, and thou didst thresh the heathen. Verses 11 to 12. And then the next section. The kingdom is extended. Not just the promised land, but now it goes to the whole world. Rome and the nations unite against Christ, and Christ conquers them. After Armageddon, he extends his power against Rome, etc. Thou didst walk through the seas. He dominated the seas of nations. And then lastly, Habakkuk's total confidence in Yahweh's justice. Jury is greatly humbled, we'll see about that in a minute, but saved. During the period of Elijah, only the Calebs and the Joshuas, that type of people, enter into the promised land. Those that come back from diaspora, many of them perish as they come back. But only the faithful enter into the promised land. And that will be a large community at that time. There'll be 40 years return, so many children will have been born in that time probably. And the fig tree shall, well, not blossom, because of the problems with many of those, unlike Caleb and Joshua. Yet I will rejoice in Yahweh, says Habakkuk. Oh, I can see God accomplishing his purpose. I'm delighted. So now let's come back to the beginning. Habakkuk's song of conquest and glory. Remember what Habakkuk was? Habakkuk was more than just the prophet. Yes, he was a great man. He was a Levitical watchman, and he was in the temple choir, and he wrote an amazing song of the final victory. We've seen it outlined just a moment ago. His words here in Habakkuk 3 are described by Smith's Bible Dictionary as a poetic genius of the highest order. Beautifully laid out in beautiful Hebrew poetry. So chapters 1 and 2 are rhythmic, but chapter 3 was of the noblest poetic form. Oh, little wonder. We saw what it contains. It's probably based on Moses' Song of Deliverance in Exodus chapter 15, verses 1 to 19. If I turned it up, we'd look at verse 19, but we're not going to have time to do that, I don't think. So he triumphed gloriously. That's what that song said. But now, the plea for the consummation. Remember, he was bothered, wasn't he? Oh, you're going to crush the jury. Now, he wants Christ to emerge from Sinai, to go forth and to achieve great victories. So in verse 1 we read the prayer of Haggai, the prophet, upon Shigionoth. Shigionoth, Strong says, is a rambling poem. It's in the feminine gender. So the implication is that it's the song of the bride that's described in Revelation chapter 16 verse 7, who wonderfully emerges in Habakkuk chapter 3 as a lower. Look at verse 3. God came from Teman. Well, that word God is a singular, Eloah. It's the man of the one. It's the man of the one. And here, Habakkuk is thrilled to see that man of the one emerging, that united community of saints, united with the Lord Jesus Christ. But look at verse 3. Eloah came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. So he heard, and he was afraid. Sorry, it's verse 2 I should have read. Yahweh, I have heard thy speech, and was afraid. O Yahweh, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make known in wrath, remember mercy. So he's learning that what he'd said was wrong. And he seeks Yahweh's now mercy. We won't look at it, but in chapter 3, verse 16, the RSV has, I will now quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invaded us. Yes, he says, I know that there's going to be cruel events that are going to take place in this land, but my people learn as a consequence. So Habakkuk was ready to quietly wait, knowing that the day would come and bring better times. Lamentation says, it's good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of Yahweh. And in wrath he says, remember mercy. He prays to God that he will remember his purpose with Israel. Remember what it was? I will take you from the nations and gather you from all countries and bring you into your own land. He says, now do that, Yahweh. That's what I'm looking forward to. And God is about to do it. God is about to do it. It's Eloah. It's the man of the one, as I said before. There's the quote that refers to Jesus as that man, the man of the one. Brother Thomas calls him, in the old Eureka, I'm afraid, heavenly host in that position. Volume 1, page 51. Came. Well, Eloah will come. And we're expecting it any moment, isn't it? Christ to return to Sinai and ourselves to be gathered there. And we will emerge with him. What a wonderful thought. But it comes from the south. That's the region of Sinai. Many quotes, and look at this. Many quotes in the scriptures indicate to us where judgment is probably going to be. We cannot be absolute. But it is always emerging from the region of Sinai. Okay? Here's Mount Sinai. He's always seen first emerging from that area and moving first of all into Egypt. All right? But there's a chain of some of those quotes that show that to be the case. Set forth from Sinai, as in Sinai, from the Timad, came from the wilderness, from the desert, and so forth. But now come back to the record. We left it a moment ago at that point there. And there's the quotes, some of the quotes, to say that he will come out of the area of Sinai. And his glory covered the heavens. These are the new heavens wherein righteousness will dwell. He will be united with us. We will be part of that community that comes out, the Aloha. And here's the source of true light, spiritual light. Verse 4. And his brightness was as the light. He had horns coming out of his hand. And there was the hiding of his power. So Christ was always the light of the world. But now, because we've followed in the way of Christ, we're part of that Aloha. We will go forth and we will be the light of the world in the future. We will, in a sense, be the Son of Righteousness with Christ, emanating the truth to the world. And he had horns coming out of his hand. Horns are powers. But here it's spiritual power, illuminating the world in the hope of salvation. But not first. Yes, this will go forth, but look, verse 5. Before him went pestilence, and burning coals went forth at his feet. Rotherham says, before him marched pestilence, and fever goeth forth at his feet. Coronavirus? Not sure, but something similar. You know, in Ezekiel 38 it says that the Gogian coast will be destroyed by volcanic consequences and pestilence. Pestilence. And that word burning coals, the margin quite correctly, burning diseases. So here we are, plagues going forth. You know, we won't have to tote a submachine gun or a sword in the kingdom age. If nations don't do what we want, we just say, boom, and they've got a disease. They've got an illness, a fiery illness, and they will be humbled quickly and submit to us. You know, we won't turn it up. Time's really running away from me already. Zechariah chapter 14 says to us repeatedly that in the kingdom age disease will go forth against those nations who don't come up from year to year to worship the Lord. Fail to come up? All right, you'll cop it. And that's one of the ways in which it's done. And those quotes there speak to us of their flesh consuming away because they didn't come up and worship the King, come up to Jerusalem. And then in verse 6 we read, he stood and measured the earth. He beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills did bow. His ways are everlasting. So he measured the earth for judgment to be executed. He drove asunder the nations. Rotherham says, caused the nations to tremble. My word, you would, wouldn't you? When you see the power that these saints, ourselves, God willing, will have in that day. And the everlasting mountains were scattered, and the perpetual hills did bow. Not far from Habakkuk. Let's have a look at Haggai. Let's have a look at Haggai a couple of pages over. Haggai chapter 2, verse 6. And we read there, for thus saith Yahweh of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. So you see, at our command, earthquake can take place. Volcanic effects can occur. And the results are going to be dramatic. And the political powers are going to be brought down. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 25 says, the days of great slaughter when the towers fall. And again in Ezekiel chapter 38, we know this well, mountains shall be thrown down. the days when that great earthquake shall take place, dramatic events will take place upon the earth. And his ways are everlasting. His ways were the ways of old. So if you go back into Scripture and learn from Abraham, David, the faithful down through time, there you will learn how to walk. That's what will tell the nations. Humble yourselves before us. Don't allow us to judge you because of these diseases and fiery things. Humble yourselves and seek the way of everlasting. So our appeal will go to the nations, brethren and sisters. But now, where does it go first? Remember we asked that question? The immediate neighbours, Arabs, Egypt, subdued. Look what verse 7 says. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Where's Cushan? Well, it's the area of Cush, and it's Ethiopia and Sudan today, all right? So when Christ emerges into Egypt, as Isaiah 16 shows to us, we might look at that in a moment. He moves into Egypt, he moves further south than that, into Cush, and then returns, and then moves into the area of Midian over here. So you can see he goes forth dramatically to subdue those nations to the south. Look with me for a moment to Isaiah 19. Isaiah 19 is a very, very good quote in reference to this area, or this subject. And in Isaiah 19 verse 21 he says, and Yahweh shall be known to Egypt, and the Egyptians shall know that Yahweh in that day, and shall do sacrifice and oblation. Yea, they shall vow a vow unto Yahweh and perform it. And Yahweh shall smite Egypt, he shall smite and heal it. And they shall return they shall return even to Yahweh, and he shall be entreated of them and shall heal them. So you see, yes, they will be oppressed, but they will submit, they will reform and become associated with the Lord Jesus Christ at that time, willingly accept his control. So it's the area to the south that first is the area he deals with. But now, moving on, it's got to be a worldwide conquest of the nations. Worldwide. Look at verse 8. Was Yahweh displeased against the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea? That thou didst ride upon thine horses and thy chariots of salvation. So why the emphasis on these rivers? They are symbols of nations, as we can see there. And I believe what he is talking about, first of all, is to the north of the promised land, Euphrates. To the south, the Nile. And he's going to crush the seas in that area, which is indicative of the nations. So Syria today, Lebanon today, Iraq today, all of those areas will be brought under his control. And so a great event will take place. And then in verse 9, thy bow was made quite naked. Thy bow was made quite naked. According to the oaths of the tribes, even thy word, Selah, thou didst cleave the earth with rivers. Thy bow was made quite naked, unsheathed. He's ready to go into battle. And according to oath, so there's, God has promised in times gone old, in the promises to Abraham, down through the ages, he will fill the earth with his glory. It will be accomplished. What we read about Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 14, it will be accomplished. He's going to fulfill his word, and it's going to come to pass, and he'll cleave the earth with rivers. The whole topography of the earth will be changed. We won't turn to it, but in Ezekiel chapter 47, it speaks of the Mount of Olives being split, and the rivers going down toward the east, healing the Dead Sea, and then the water flowing up the river the Jordan. The whole land will be tipped up, so Jordan will flow the other way. The world's going to be dramatically changed, utterly dramatically changed by these great earthquakes that's going to take place. Isn't it wonderful, brethren and sisters, we've got the truth? We're not going to be like the Gentiles out here living in that sort of thing. It's going to be a fearful environment for a time. And then verse 10, the mountains saw thee, and they trembled, as I said, the nations. The overflowing of the waters passed by, and the deep uttered his voice and lifted up his hands on high. The mountains are symbolic of the nations. Here we can see worldwide. They're going to be trembling. They're going to be in fear as they see what's happening between those two rivers to start with. But then, divine authority extends right over the whole earth. Whole earth will be subdued then. This begins then that 40-year period when the saints go forth and Elijah begins his work too. But we read there in verse 11, the sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went. At the shining of thy glittering spear. The sun, the political heavens. The moon, the religious powers. They stood still. And these powers are subdued. Look at Isaiah 24, verse 23. Isaiah 24, verse 23. And we read there, then the moon, and this is quoted in Luke 21, verse 25. Then the moon shall be confounded and the sun ashamed, when Yahweh of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem and before his ancients gloriously. Yes, now he will have that territory in the land. The Holy Land will be his. He will reign from there, but he'll extend it now worldwide. What a dramatic event that will be. And the light of his arrows, evil arrows of famine will go forth when necessary. Look at what's happening at the moment. They're terrified in what's happening in America because a lot of the food comes from to the south and it's having a massive storm dawning on it right now. And they're wondering what's going to happen in America. Well, there will be famines to those countries who fail to submit to the Lord Jesus Christ in that day, and to us in that day. So what will the saints do? Thou didst march through the land in indignation. Thou didst thresh the heathen in anger. You can imagine them. They're going forward to thresh. Now we don't need to turn this up because it got highlighted in our last lecture somewhat. But you know, in Revelation chapter 16, verse 16, it speaks of Armageddon. What does Armageddon mean? A heap of sheaves in a valley for threshing. We will go forth to execute the spirit of Armageddon further into the nations. Armageddon will have been accomplished by this time. It'll go forward into the other nations. And so there will be a gathering of sheaves and a threshing. But now we come to a very critical verse, verse 13. Why? Well, let's read it. Thou wentest forth, well, we could say, we wentest forth, for the salvation of thy people, even for salvation with thine anointed. Thou woundest the head of thy head out of the house of the wicked, by discovering the foundation unto the neck. Selah. So here we can see Judea is going to be saved. It's going to be saved by the saints. What a wonderful prospect it's going to be as we go forth to care for them. They went us forth for the salvation of thy people. He went from Sinai to Egypt and then to Jerusalem to save the Jewish people. That will be one of his prime goals. Brother Thomas says the perfect powerlessness of his own people moves him to intervene. He's going to look at the horrible situation they're in. Russia's been in their terrible judgments happen. And in their love, our love for them, we will be moved to respond. And with thine anointed, the Lord Jesus Christ will be with us, God willing. Thou woundest the head of the wicked. RSV, thou didst crush the head. Interesting, the Hebrew word rosh, of the wicked. Well, I think rosh is already somewhat crushed, but it'll be further crushing that's taking place outside of the land. But of course, the crushing of the head is a fulfilment of Genesis 3:15. And we're going to see that being accomplished here. So, he will set his face against Gog. He's already done so. But here is those outside of the land who will be somewhat still following in the ways of Gog. And he will discover the foundation of the neck. Rotherham says, bearing the foundation of thy neck, showing how vulnerable they are to total destruction under the hand of the saints. So he moves forward, my dear brethren and sisters, and moves into the land of Israel and cares for that Jewish people and cares for those in the land. Now the kingdom is extended outside the boundaries of that land. The kingdom is extended in verses 14 and 15. Look at verse 14. Thou didst strike through with his staves the head of his villages. They came out as a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was as to devour the poor secretly. Bit difficult that, but let's look at it. The word villages, RV, changes it to warriors. Oh, so this is indeed fighting. So civil war is going to take place outside. Chaos is going to go on outside. Every man's sword against his brother in the lands outside. Some will be saying, maybe we should submit to Christ. Some will say, let's fight against you if you say that. They came out as a whirlwind to scatter me. Habakkuk sees himself, me, as part of the saints who are confronted by the Catholic nations particularly, who unite against him. We know this, but let's look at it. It's a beautiful psalm. Come with me to Psalm 2. The nations unite against Christ. This is outside now the boundaries of the land. Psalm 2. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? Can't they wake up? Look at the Mount of Olives. Look what's happened to the Jews and the Gentiles in the land. Look at Armageddon. Why do they rage? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed, against Christ. So you see, they're going to marshal together against Christ after Armageddon. You can't believe it, can you? But they will. And their rejoicing was as to devour the poor secretly. Rotherham says their exultant thought is to devour the oppressed one in the secret place. And he's talking probably about Jewry. So they will crush or endeavour to do so, Jewry outside the land. We know Elijah's going to return. He's going to have to fight his way back. But verse 15. Thou didst walk through the sea with thine horses, through the heap of great waters. Walk through the sea? What's this sea? Well, the sea here is the troubled sea, the nations. And it will be indeed a troubled sea. The nations are symbolised by the oceans today, aren't they? Christ will take the offensive and he will attack the nations outside of the land. He will attack the sea of nations. Oh, they will be angry, but my goodness, they're going to be suppressed by the power of God working through the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, finally, well, not finally, but here's Habakkuk's total confidence in Yahweh's justice. You know, Habakkuk knew now that the wicked wouldn't go unpunished. He thought that back in tail end of chapter 1. And all the righteous go unrewarded. The Jews that reform, he was terribly worried what would happen to them. He now knows that God in all his justice will crush the nations and will save those Jewish people and the saints, of course, ourselves, God willing, who walk in that right way. And so he says, verse 16, when I heard, my belly trembled. You know, you can see the utter justice and righteousness of Yahweh. My lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he cometh up unto the people, he will invade them with his troops. My belly trembled, my lips quivered. Rotherham said, I heard, and I trembled within me. As Yahweh would certainly act through the saints, that I might rest in the day of trouble. Oh, it's going to be that you'll be blessed, Habakkuk, along with the faithful, if there are those faithful enduring, and the saints, ourselves, God willing. RSV says, I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invade us. Isn't that what we're thinking right now as we look at the crazy nation? We're quietly waiting. We're expecting at any moment Christ will return. Lamentation says it is a good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of Yahweh. Are you doing that, brethren and sisters? That's what I'm longing for at every moment. You know, we're living at a prestigious time. Only just this week was the day of blowing of trumpets. We're now into the feast times of the Jews. Could it be this year or is it next year? Christ's return looks to be at any moment. I will quietly wait like Habakkuk. But he was waiting, of course, after Armageddon, for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invade us. That Catholic group, the Russians and such like, those that have gone back into their land who survived it, and those who are marshalled there. And so then in verse 17, there's quite a strange section here. Let's read it. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall the fruit be in the vines, the labour of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flocks shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. What's going on here? Well, he's talking of a whole lot of symbols here that symbolise Jewry. He said he's remembering what they were like in his day. Remember Josiah? He's gone. The nation has apostatized. They're in iniquity. And he's seen them, those iniquitous Jews, oppressed and changing. This is what he's talking about. So having realised that he should wait upon Yahweh, and that despite the trials only the just shall surely live by faith, so now he expresses his utter confidence that Yahweh will act to reform the Jews and judge those who fail to walk in that right way. And it's so judgment first of all that he's talking about. He gives 6 agricultural calamities that the Jews will experience. First of all, the fig tree won't blossom. Well, we could turn these quotes up, brethren and sisters, but I think we all know them, don't we? The fig tree is a symbol of Israel. No fruit in the vines. Psalm 80 verse 8 says the vine out of Egypt. So Israel is that vine. The olive shall fail. Romans chapter 11 verse 17. Jewry was an olive tree. The field yield no fruit and no meat. Break up the fallow ground. The flocks are cut off. Ezekiel chapter 34 verse 2. The shepherds do not feed their flocks, and no herd shall have pasture. Why don't we look up the last one? Come with me to Joel, it's only a little way away. In Joel chapter 1, he says to us there in verse 18, how do the herds groan, and the herds of cattle are perplexed, because they have no pasture, yea, the flocks of the sheep are made desolate. So here he's gone through and he says, yes, Israel's going to suffer. And my word, it will in the kingdom age. In the lead up to the millennium, they will indeed suffer. Where? In the land. Remember how many? There's only about a third of them survive in that land. And what about in the diaspora? Well, Elijah goes forth. And what has to happen to the Jews there? Well, remember, he's got to work his way out. And he takes 40 years like Moses of old. And they come from all those lands back to the land of Israel. And they are opposed by Roman Catholicism, by Russia, by nations. And they've got to fight their way back. And so, those that follow carnal ways will be destroyed. And for those who survive, the carnal ways within them will be changed, and their spiritual way will blossom forth. Look how it continues in Joel chapter 3 verse 17. Verse 17. And look at the tail end. When he cometh up unto the people, he will invade them with his troops. No, verse 17. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herds in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in Yahweh. I will joy in the God of my salvation. He will look at his people and see through the trials they have learned. Just like we learn through trials, brethren and sisters. We learn through trials, and look what they're going to be. Be as a watered garden. Look at Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31, verse 12. And we read there, therefore they shall come and sing in the height of Zion, and shall flow together to the goodness of Yahweh, for wheat and for wine and for oil and for the young of the flock and the herds. And their soul shall be as a watered garden, and they shall not sorrow any more at all. Many of those symbols there are the symbols here that are crushed, but now blossoming forth. And it takes us through to the kingdom age when they will be a watered garden. The Jews will truly be a changed people in that wonderful kingdom age that we're looking forward to. What a wonderful prospect. But now, what does Elijah do? He goes forth to all the nations. Return my people to the land, he says. And so he will go forth, and no doubt many with him. Jews from the land, or brethren and sisters ourselves, immortalised, going forth to the Jews, working with Elijah. And the consequence will be they will return and come from all lands on ships and across the land. It will take probably 40 years, and they will gather there at the borders of the land, to the north and to the south, and then come into that land. Those who are the Caleb's and Joshua's. They are those who respond to God's word. Those are they who respond to the saints. Yet I will rejoice, says Habakkuk, in Yahweh. I will joy in the God of my salvation. So he will look at that and be utterly thrilled to see what's going on. And so then coming back to the record before us, Yet I will rejoice in Yahweh. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Strong says, jump for joy. That's what we'll do. And so will the Jews, the faithful Jews. In Yahweh I will joy. I'll spin around in the God of my salvation, says Habakkuk. And so says also the faithful saints with him. If we rejoice in Yahweh, then we have put our trust in him. So a wonderful time waits Habakkuk and us. What a wonderful prospect before us. And then verse 19, Yahweh Adonai is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places, to the chief singer on my stringed instrument. So he's talking about himself, but it's us too, brethren and sisters. Yahweh Adonai is my strength. This is the title of the song of deliverance. And so here we can see it's being accomplished. The song of deliverance has been accomplished. It's a wonderful prospect. Isaiah 63 says, he remembered the days of old, led by Moses, and the dividing of the water, to make an everlasting name. So Yahweh, my strength, my lot, my deliverer, will go forth. And of course, the Jews of diaspora coming back will finally learn that. and they will remember the days of old and reform. And he will make my feet like hinds' feet. What are hinds' feet? They're a female deer. They're noted for their sure-footedness. And so we and the Jews finally will be like that. Make our feet like hinds' feet. Walk in the right way. Walk in the way of Yahweh. And he will make me to walk upon mine high places. Habakkuk is left feeling victorious, that he will certainly govern in the kingdom age. He will ride upon the high places. And so, coming finally to the conclusion, he concludes with this separate section. To the chief singer on my stringed instruments. There he concludes. The Hebrew for the word stringed instruments is niganoth, smitings. So it's a percussion instrument that he's talking about, like I've depicted in some of those pictures down there. And it's used, that word niganoth is in Psalm 4 verse 1. But here, Rotherham renders it, to the chief musician upon my double harp. Oh, what a joy it will be. There he is sitting in the kingdom age, in Jerusalem. What a wonderful prospect. Singing to Yahweh, thanking him for all that he has done. Speaking as we should do now, in prospect of what's to happen. Speaking psalms and hymns and spiritual songs in your heart to Yahweh and unto God. Are we doing that? Is that true in our prayers, brethren and sisters? And note, finally, the highest form of offering under the law is the thanksgiving offering. In Leviticus chapter 22, verse 29, it says, offer it at your own will. Hebrews 13 says, let us offer the sacrifice of praise. It's the highest form of offering. And so we do so in our hymns and we do so in our prayers, brethren and sisters. Let's pray that we do. What a wonderful prospect we've got. A wonderful hope of the kingdom. Little wonder we can be so thankful. So thank Yahweh, genuinely, with all your heart. And so, let us be part of that wonderful prospect that's shortly to be established upon this earth. The days are short. The days are quickly flying, my dear brethren and sisters, as we started our talk. Oh, just 1 week. Look at what's happened. How long is it going to be before Habakkuk's chapter 3 is going to begin to be fulfilled? Are we ready? Make sure that our heart is genuine in our love for the truth and the loves of things of Yahweh. And so we find a place in that wonderful kingdom shortly to be established. Thank you.
On behalf of you all, brothers and sisters, I'd like to thank Brother Grant for his encouraging words. Certainly exciting times await us. They really, really do, don't they? And as Brother Grant said in his opening remarks about having our bags mentally packed for Christ's return. Such fitting words. Thank you again, Brother Grant.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found the episode helpful. Don't forget, most of these episodes are also available as videos on our video channel, cdvideo.org. So head over and take a look. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please get in touch or leave us a voice message. We love to hear your feedback. You can email us at btf@cdvideo.org. If you enjoyed the episode, then please share it with others. Until next time, may God bless you in your studies and your walk towards God's kingdom. Amen.